Well, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Realm of Unknown. I'm your host, Shane, and it's been a bit of time since we've had a new episode of sorts. That's primarily due to scheduling issues and also me wishing to sort of bulk everything out in one go. It's something that I kind of want to do moving forwards, especially if it's going to make it easier to get more consistent uploads, released in a actual schedule or pattern. But yeah, so for the most part, we are back, and the episode for today is going to be a bit of a short one due to more or less the topic rather than anything, that came about. But if anyone is joining us for the first time, this is a paranormal, supernatural filled podcast mixed in with a bunch of mysteries and conspiracies and pretty much anything that I find bizarre or interesting or just weird in general. It's pretty much that sort of look and feel, and it's kind of what I kind of want to keep moving forward with. And with that tradition, we have today's episode, which is unique but again short, in being the Man from Taured, or otherwise known as the Taured Mystery. So, the Man from Taured refers to a so called mystery of a man from an unknown country. It is a story of a man who arrives in a Japanese airport from the country so called Taured. Many people have claimed that this story is true, so the crux of the problem is, again, the fact that the country doesn't exactly exist, and there's no real timeline of events to really draw from in order to come to a conclusive solution to sort of pinpoint what's going on. So let's get into the nitty gritty because the story kind of has two structures to it. Then I'm going to talk about the actual detailed, I guess, accounts of the overall story. So the man's arrival. Again, this man is completely mysterious. We do not know his name. I'm just going to refer to him as the man. So the story of the Man from Taured begins across several different sources during a hot summer day in July of 1953 in Japan. On this particular day, a man was said to have arrived to the Haneda Airport, known also as the Tokyo International Airport, and this man was described as Caucasian looking with a beard. Whilst his primary language is said to be French, he purportedly was also able to speak Japanese along with several other languages. The sequence of events then differs slightly according to the different, versions or sources that you're going to find the story for. One version has the man handing over his passport to have it stamped, and the Japanese immigration officer noticed something was strange about it. Whilst the passport looked authentic, the again country that it was issued within, Taured, was not recognized and actually doesn't exist. Neither the officer nor their colleagues were able to sort of, determine what was going on, so they asked the man to step aside to ask a few additional questions. In another version, the man mentioned that he was actually from Taured, so he initiated the conversation, and then that was when the immigration officer asked him to step aside for further questions. So, where are these questions? Most of these questions relate to, the location of Taured, the validity of this man's passport, and sort of what is going on with this strange country because there seems to be documentation of it, but we don't know what that is. So the next part of the story details that the man tried to convince the immigration officers that Taured did in fact exist, and according to the traveler, Taured was located between France and Spain, and it had been in existence for roughly 1,000 years or so. However, the land and its people supposedly was there much longer. However, once shown a map, the man pointed out the area which is currently occupied by the Principality of Andorra, not Taured. So this puzzled him as to why, this location that he believed was his home country was actually called Andorra on this map. Both sides kind of refused to give in. The Japanese officials insisted that this is the legitimate map and that Taured doesn't exist and has never existed, while the mysterious man argued the otherwise, saying that, the map is fake, like, what's going on, are you trying to trick me type stuff. And the thing is, the passport is legitimate. Like, it was formatted properly. It was real enough to actually, probably deceive people at first glance. However, the country of origin is and the country of issuing is the only disparity. That was the thing that caught their attention, and therefore why this man was being questioned. So the story continues that eventually the man was brought into custody by the officers, more or less on the suspicion that he was involved in some sort of criminal activity. Specifically, they were curious and in some cases cautious to the fact that perhaps this was a drug smuggling ring or an attempt to leave after doing so. So they brought him to a nearby hotel for the night, and whilst they conducted their investigations, he was to stay there and have two guards issued to his room during the night. So during this time, they actually went about gathering all his materials. Again, they have the passport, they have his documentations, and they went to go get his luggage, which they did get, and they were able to sort of hold in order to do further, experimentations and investigations to try to determine his actual reason to be in Japan. So, to ensure that the man did not escape, they had issued two guards in place of his room. And during the morning, though, when the officers went to go get the man for further questioning, he was gone. He pretty much just up and vanished. There's no evidence that he actually tried to escape the room. There was actually no evidence that he had been in the room. The bed was not disturbed. The bathroom was not, used in any way. It was pretty much as if no one was in the hotel room to begin with. Additionally, all his documentations, which were, being used as evidence, as well as his luggage that they were able to obtain, all vanished as well. And pretty much every single trace of this mysterious man up and disappeared. And the thing is, too, the hotel room that they put him in wasn't something that was, ground level. It wasn't in like a motel. It was up high, and there was no reasonable way for him to actually get out without having gone past the guards. Like, there was no actual way to get out of this room safely. So it's pretty much he just up and vanished. What's going on here, and what are some of the, explanations that people kind of propose when it comes to this? So one of the most notable explanations for this incident is that the man from Taured is actually someone who passed through a parallel dimension by accident and ended up here in Japan during our time. So this is suggested based off the explanation that parallel Earths may be similar to ours, but slightly differ in certain ways. So in this case, Andorra for us would actually be known as Taured over there. Another suggestion is that the man is in fact a time traveler from the future, thus the interpretation of arguably more problematic, though. This interpretation more or less kind of is out there and doesn't really have any set reason as to why people kind of believe it. They just do. It is also insinuated that perhaps an incident like this did take place, however, just not as sensational. Essentially, the story would be a much more mundane and boil down to pretty much just a faked passport, not something to do with, a mystical, unforeseen country that no one's ever heard of. Finally, and probably the more plausible explanation for the entirety of this story is that it is in fact merely nothing more than an urban legend. So the story of the man from Taured might not actually have occurred in the first place and may have been the creation of someone's imagination. As a side note, some of the sources that I did come across, known specifically the book called The Man from Taured, it's just something that I want to note. If you come across the story and you're looking to sort of learn about it, don't take that book as the primary source for the story. The author kind of modernized it in a lot of ways and sort of pretty much took the premise of the story and just changed all the details. He based it in the O'Hare International Airport here in the U.S., and he also based the time frame to 2018 to 2019 and pretty much changed the names and everything. So let's move into the final theory that we discussed, the idea that this was pretty much just something that was made up. Because it is interesting to think that, hey, it's an urban legend, it's something that was made up, but it's not something that necessarily was an urban legend of modern, or I should say, the technological era. So supposedly, this again story of the man from Taured happened in 1954 or so. Everyone involved could very much well be alive at this point. It's only a few decades ago. They would be grandparents, great grandparents, what have you. When the story would have first come out, and to modern times now. Yet we have no first-hand accounts or even second or third-hand accounts of what actually happened. We have no citations of where any of this was written down. You can't pretty much find a definitive source for any of the information. Additionally, no one actually reported on the story. There's no newspapers, there's no news stations or articles. There's not even anything from the airport itself, from Japan, that would even point to this incident having occurred. And if a man disappeared straight up from an airport, I would feel like at least one local newspaper would have at least covered it. So, additionally, the Directory of Possibilities by and edited by Colin Wilson. This is something that we're going to be discussing because this possibly could point to the original origin of the story. So the book was published in 1981 on various supernatural short stories. Essentially, it's just like a collective book of weird stories across the globe. Here is where stories by other writers sort of were culminated, and it was written that on page 86 there was a story called The Man from Taured, and it goes as this. In 1954, a passport check in Japan is alleged to have produced a man with papers issued by the nation of Taured. So, as we can find, this is pretty much one of, if not the first documentation of the story or mention of the story. Again, this is taking place in the early 80s. And again, this is coming from a book where people are essentially putting in fan stories or written fictional stories on their own and submitting them into a collective storybook. So it's not really the best start for this story. Additionally, a second story is found in the book titled Strange But True Mysteries and Bizarre People. This was published about a decade or so afterwards in 1999, and Thomas Seelman writes in the book that, quote, there have been many reports and visitors from other planets dropping by on Earth. In 1954, a Japanese authorities detained a man trying to enter the country with a passport that revealed that it was from the unheard country named Taured. A thorough check was made by the custom officials to see if there was any such place anywhere on Earth, but they drew a blank. The stranger refused to throw light onto the whereabouts of this mysterious nation and quickly left Japan. So, pretty much the way you can look at it is the now modern interpretation of the Man from Taured Mystery, and pretty much the story that you could expect to see or hear or, be told through passing by a friend maybe on the internet would be a combination of these two stories. The first being the one that kind of spurred it on and gave the details of the year of 1954, as well as, the disappearance of the man. And the second being the one that really detailed the fact that, hey, this was a guy in Japan. This was something where the custom officials, took him aside, and eventually he disappeared. So it's definitely interesting. I learned about the story just kind of in passing and was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. I kind of want to look into this. And eventually, though, when I learned more of the details, I realized that I'm looking at an urban legend story, not an actual story that occurred. Because I would say it'd be mainstream type thing. It would be very more widespread if some man just disappeared from an airport and was claiming to be from a different country that doesn't exist. So, yeah, I would say the Man from Taured is definitely an interesting story if it were to have happened. Unfortunately, it is not. And actually, though, this may be spurring on the sort of trend that I kind of want to work with in some future episodes to maybe discuss urban legends or stories that are creepy for sure, um, but perhaps may not have the most firm grounds in nonfiction or reality. And I think I would like to do a few of those moving forward. So, but until then, though, again, I told you that this would be a sort of short episode for the most part. Again, mainly due to the story itself, because that's it. Like, that's all the details we have and the explanations that were there for the mysterious man. And I will be wrapping it up because I have a few more episodes to record before setting out for the day, and I want to get those out because I want to also get them uploaded. So definitely stay tuned for those to be coming out. If you are new to listening to the podcast, be sure to, check us out on pretty much any platform you can think of. We're pretty much on all of them. And if you want to stay up to date on any new news or, releases or anything going on, check out the Twitter, Instagram, or the Patreon, all Realm of Unknown. There's also the Facebook page, but for the most part, go to the other sources because I'll be there much more frequently. Until then, and I should say until the next episode at least, I hope you guys enjoyed and remember to stay spooky.